my old self died a decade ago when I decided I didn't want to be that person that was suffering so much anymore and was in that job that they didn't like and had 100 million negative thoughts going around in their mind. That person, that Sara, died, and then I was reborn again in the same life.
Hello, everybody. You're listening to Chatting with Candice. I'm your host, Candice Horbacz. As usual, we are going to go through our protocol before we hop into the episode. So if you have not hit like and subscribe, please do that so you are notified anytime we have new content. It also helps with the algorithm. And if it's been a minute since you have left a 5-star review, or if you haven't at all, it takes 1 second. So hit that 5-star review button, and you can even just leave a little smiley face. You don't have to type anything long. It really, truly does help the podcast grow. And I could not do this without all of you. And thank you so much ahead of time. We are going to do our shout outs really quick before we jump in. So I wanted to do the coffee shout outs. If you want to contribute to the podcast, you can go to chattingwithcandice.com and you can either click that link that says buy me a coffee or the Patreon. Both go directly into the podcast. If you join the Patreon, you get early access to episodes and you get to ask questions to the guests before they come on. So coffee shout outs. I want to do a big shout out to Ultra Magnus. Thank you for those cups of coffee. To Roger and to Keith. Thank you so very much for them. I really appreciate it. It goes right back in and helps the podcast grow, and it goes into editing, honestly. This week, we have the incredible Sara Grynberg joining the podcast. So Sara hosts the wildly successful podcast called The Life of Greatness. If you haven't checked it out, I highly recommend it. She has some really heavy hitters in the spiritual space and the personal development space. It's an amazing podcast. She's also a best-selling author, international keynote speaker, and I am so excited to have this conversation. I have been doing a lot of retreats and spiritual personal development workshops, so the timing of this recording is awesome. I really hope you enjoy the episode. Let's jump in. Sara, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. As I was just saying, I was so excited and looking forward to this because I feel you and I have so much overlap. Your podcast is incredible. Your conversations are incredible. So I'm very excited for this.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be on your podcast.
Thank you. So I'm going to start off with my easiest question, which is, what are you here to do?
What am I here to do?
Yes.
Well, in life, I feel like I'm here to educate people so they can live their greatest life possible. I really feel that when I got into the work that I'm doing about personal development and mindset and allowing people to overcome negative emotions, that it was teaching people how to live their greatest existence. And then the feedback to me was just tenfold in how I felt so grateful to be able to be in a position that I was helping people. And then that helped me live my greatest life. It's like when you know that you're following your dharma, it's just such a beautiful feeling because it feels so right. And when you're doing that, you get to sprinkle that onto everyone that you come into contact with. So yes, that's what I feel like I'm here to do.
I would agree with that very much so. It's like, I feel like for me, when I was first getting into this space of personal development and changing your mindset, spirituality, immediately I just saw how amazing my changes were in like internally and externally. I was like, this is what I've been waiting for my whole life, and I just have to share it with everybody. And sometimes it might have been a bit of a forceful share where you try to like really help someone. It's almost like you're 1 foot down the path from someone else and you're like, oh, there's a pothole, don't step in that. And you try so hard to just like tell the person behind you about the pothole, but they just refuse to listen. And then I'm getting to a place where leading through inspiration rather than like telling or suggesting, because if
Yes.
someone's not asking for like their roadmap, it's just they're not ready for that next step.
Absolutely. And I think what you said about inspiration is so correct. Like I always try to be the best person I can and then let people look at what I'm doing and gain some wisdom from that to be able to change themselves rather than forcing them and telling them that they should be a certain way. I mean, it's that whole idea that you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. And I think people get quite resentful if you tell them to change, especially when they're not ready. But if you inspire them, then it's up to them to then make that change. And that's a really beautiful thing because, none of us like forcing people to do something they don't want to do. And we see it with kids, right? You told me you had 2 kids. I also have 2 kids that are young. When you're a mother, it's different. Your kids are young, so you're teaching them everything. But when you're dealing with adults, they make their own decisions in life. And what I've learned, which can be hard at times when we really love people and we just want them to live their greatest existence, is that it's up to them to make the change. And sometimes their heart might want to, but their mind just can't get around that. And it's their journey. So we have to let them live that journey themselves.
Mhm. You see that a lot too in romantic relationships where you have the one person that they say that they're working on themselves and they're trying to like fix that relationship or fix something within their partner. And I had this conversation with someone just earlier today and she was like, "Well, he does all of these bad behaviors and I'm trying to get him to stop and there's like addiction." And I I had the tough response, which was like, "Well, first of all, you can work on him, but if you don't work on yourself, once that relationship eventually implodes as they all have in your pattern, you're just going to find another replacement that's very similar."
Yes.
So, my perspective is you work on yourself and then everything else will start to kind of change externally. And it's not about the other person, right? Again, you can't like force change onto someone else. And then the really tough question of why are you bringing this into your reality or why are you creating this? And she did not like that feedback. And I'm curious about your perspective as far as manifestation and creating your own reality and like thoughts become things. Um, how how do you help someone navigate that really tough pill to swallow?
Well, I think everything you're saying, I totally agree with, and I think in relationships or even, recently there was someone who was quite close to me that became unwell. And how can you tell someone that they create their own disease? It can be so hard for people to hear. And I even sometimes still try and get my head around that idea. But when you're in the belief of that, it means that if you can create illness, you can create health as well. So, what do I need to do to be able to create that? And obviously, through manifestation techniques, a lot of the full on work needs to be done with the whole, am I enough? How do you view yourself and the subconscious mind and the techniques around rewiring that, which, there are so many techniques that we could go into that I've learned about doing that. And a lot of them, some are therapy, just going to talk therapy and stuff. There's something I did the other day called Psych K. I don't know if you've heard of that before. Bruce Lipton actually taught me about it when he came on my podcast. And it's all about the way that it's all about rewiring the subconscious mind. And you sit there with an instructor and they get you to sit in certain positions. And it's called energy healing. And I actually did it with someone over Zoom. And they tell you to say certain affirmations depending on what you want to work on. And then they get you to hold your body in a certain position because it's like right brain and left brain positioning that, then go into the subconscious mind. But none of this is a quick fix. So there are things like that. There are things like listening, doing affirmations in your own voice and listening to them whilst you sleep at night, because that's when the subconscious mind turns on and the conscious mind is asleep. So there are a heap of different things that we can do. But the whole idea is that we need to rewire those beliefs, those negative beliefs that we have about ourselves that sometimes we might not even realize are there. And, a lot of illness comes from not feeling good enough or not feeling enough and maybe living a life where you felt that you were unheard or you didn't do in life what you wanted to do. You did in life what other people wanted you to do. And so you've gotten to a point where life is reflecting at you that you have a time to change and you're going through hardship. But how can you mend that to be able to get on the other side of that and then live your greatest existence? So, yes, I do agree with you. Once you are on that other side, and I feel that you start to level up a bit and you're not that person that you used to be, that, as you mentioned, relationships and things can start imploding, but that might not actually be a bad thing because soon as you change, you're going to attract that same vibration to you that you're now at. And it happens a lot in friendships and stuff as well. I see, you know, a lot of people that might do a lot of inner work, or they go to these big retreats and things like that where they're doing big energetic work on themselves, and it's such a wonderful thing, and then they come out and they're like, it happened to me actually. I have to tell you a story. When I first got into personal development work, I was working doing breakfast radio. It was long hours, and I had to literally, I don't know if you've seen that morning show with Jennifer Aniston and
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Anyway, it was seriously like that, where it was like getting up at the crack of dawn and like hardcore talent, and it was just long hours, and literally your life revolved around working on this breakfast show, but it was radio. I had a 2 and a 4-year-old at the time. I was so exhausted. Anyway, I got to this point where I'm like, this is hell on earth. Like, how did I get into this position? I am exhausted, burnt out, but I just did not want to let go of this job. Like, you know, when you know something is so wrong for you and it could be a relationship or something like that, but you're like, I can't let go. Like, I just still need maybe another year on the resume and all this stuff. Anyway, absolutely exhaustion point, I said to myself, I need to do something, and I need to get into personal development work, or I need to change my life right now because I cannot go on like this. So I deep dived into a lot of different texts and studied a lot in the law of attraction and all these other things. And it was like I was a moth to a flame. I just, bang, I loved it. So anyway, I started doing all this work on myself, and 2 or 3 weeks later, my boss from Sydney comes down to Melbourne where I live and says, "Can I meet with you?" We go into a meeting room, and he says to me, the show, because we were doing a Sydney show from Melbourne because the talent were in Melbourne, and he said, "Everyone, all the roles have to now move to Sydney. So are you going to move to Sydney?" And I'm thinking, I've got 2 young kids. Like, I'm not moving to Sydney. That's not possible. And so basically, he's like, "Well, your job will be redundant." And I'm thinking to myself, I have just done this extreme personal development work. How is my life like changing for the worst? And literally for another 2 weeks, I thought, what's going on? Like, I just can't believe this is happening. Like, I'm about to like not have a job. Anyway, cut a long story short, this company that I still work at ended up saying, "We don't want to lose you. We're starting a podcasting arm. Would you be interested in moving into that?" And I was like, "Oh, I don't know. Like, I've listened to maybe one podcast before," because this is many years ago. They said, "You'll be looking after the biggest talent in Australia who are going to start doing a podcast." I'm like, oh my God. So anyway, I take on this job. It was the best job that I think I've ever had. And that one move changed my life forever. I now obviously came up with the idea for my podcast, which has been so unbelievably successful. It's catapulted my career in a way that I could never have thought of. But Candice, I would never, like, at that moment where I lost that other job that I didn't want to lose, that the universe forced me to get out of, it changed my life in such a wonderful way, but I didn't realize it at the start. It took a couple of weeks for it to unwind. And sometimes, like, if anyone's listening thinking, well, I lost a relationship or I've lost a job or I've lost something, a friend or something, let me tell you that if you've been doing the work and that's happened, that you're only going to get bigger and better things coming into your life. So for me, like I said, it changed the trajectory of my life, but it did because I started leveling up. So, you know, long answer to your question, I think that I totally agree with that. Manifestation and changing the way that you are will bring only absolute joy into your life, but sometimes you need to go through the murky waters to get to the joy. So the path is not always clear. You know, there's a beautiful saying, you have to live life looking forward, but you can only understand it looking back.
That is beautiful. Hey everyone, this is new. So we are taking a quick break for a couple of sponsors. How exciting is that we have a couple sponsors for the podcast? So this is new. Please don't skip it. Just listen. It's cool stuff, I promise. So my first one is a small company called Ragnar's Rocks, and I'll make sure I have the link below. As you know, I love crystals and I get made fun of for it all of the time, but I'm not going to change my ways, and I'm going to stand by it. I truly believe in them, and I think that they're beautiful. So sue me. But he sent me, I mean, how incredible is that? He sent me this beautiful amethyst. I've got this really cute rose quartz skull. All of this is on my table. You can't see, but when I start doing 2 cameras, you'll be able to see my little setup. And this cute little crystal Buddha. How adorable is he? These bracelets are from there. I mean, I was really stoked to have him as a sponsor because this is right up my alley. So if you're into any crystals or you just want to check out the website, it's ragnarsrocks.com, and I'll link that below. And the last affiliate, last sponsor, please don't skip. This one's a good one. So we all know the benefits of fasting. Well, my husband and I have used this company, Prolon, actually a couple of times. So I was really excited that they wanted to be an affiliate of the podcast. So if you want to try Prolon, it's a fasting mimicking diet. So you get all the benefits of a water fast, and it's a lot easier because you get this delicious food instead of having to completely eat nothing. So you can try Prolon for $150 with the code Candice. Some of the claims for, and I mean, I say claims, but I'm going off of a script, guys. 60% of people that completed the fast had better energy, mental clarity, and focus. You'll definitely shed some lbs. I felt a ton lighter after doing it. It's cool to do difficult stuff, and obviously fasting is not easy, so it's kind of cool to see how you can kind of push it and get through something that you thought you might not be able to do. It's a lot easier than just doing a water cleanse. And again, I think the average here, people lose an average of 5.7 pounds and 1.6 inches off of their waistline. So as soon as I'm done breastfeeding, I'm doing one of these, and Eric's supposed to be starting anytime now. So we'll see when he decides to start. So I'll link that below. Again, if you want to try Prolon, you can try it for $150. Use code Candice, and let's return to the episode. It's interesting. So we talk about your vibration changing or your frequency changing, and then there also has to be a deep trust for that, because if you don't listen, I'm in the belief that those hints that the universe sends you get louder and more painful and heavier and more difficult to navigate the more you don't listen, because it's like, well, you're not listening, so maybe I need to get louder and louder and louder. So you could have moved and uprooted your family, but there was some kind of trust and deep listening in that, where you're like, that's not the right decision for me. So you could have been acting out of fear or scarcity or thinking that there was nothing else better for you and staying in a position that you knew wasn't for your best and highest purpose. But on some level, you did accept it because you decided not to do that, which I think is beautiful.
Absolutely. I think having a trust and knowing is one of the things that if you're walking this path, you need to have. Like, I'm going through a big negotiation at the moment, and I actually had this conversation this morning with someone very close to me, and I'm like, you know what? Whatever the outcome, I know it's to be the highest good. Like, I always trust that. If what seems to work in my favor, then so be it. If what I then perceive isn't what I wanted, I know that it might not be what I wanted for now, but doors will open. So having that trust has changed my life, because it allows you to always know that, yes, the universe has your back, and nothing will be done to you that the universe is not, it doesn't look at people in a way that, Sarah, I don't like her, so she's going to do X. It's not, it's not a personal, the universe is not personal. The universe basically does reflects what you are. So you have to think about, like, what is my intention for this? What is my intention for this negotiation? Well, the intention for what I'm trying to negotiate is to do something that will help others. Okay, well, my hope is that it will come through. But if it doesn't, as I mentioned, then I know that something better will come down the road. But I think if we always go into everything with an intention that is positive and that has an arm of service within it, then things are going to be reflected back to us in a really beautiful way. So having faith in that and trust in that, then you're always going to be guided in a very positive direction.
I think that's a crucial element when it comes to prayer or manifestation, is that there has to be a true a true element of service, of giving back, of contribution, because if it's selfish or driven by ego, I feel like those are the things that kind of get like wish-washed away. Or if you're coming from it from like this greedy lack where you're trying to like take, 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 you
Yes.
kind of get stuck into that cycle. There's this book that I reference all the time, and it's called Outwitting the Devil by Napoleon Hill. I don't know if you've ever like read or
I
listened
know
to it.
him, but I know I haven't, heard that
Incredible.
book.
It's, like, the number 1 book I recommend for everyone to listen to. It's the best on audio, but he gets into prayer and he says, "Whatever energy you're praying in is what is going to be delivered to you." So if you're delivering out of desperation, that's all you're gonna get, or if you're,
Yes.
like, praying out of lack, that's all you're gonna get. So you have to really ground yourself and connect yourself and clear yourself before you can ask for anything. Otherwise, you're gonna get what you're asking for, which is not necessarily a good thing.
Yeah, it's that whole "I am" statement, which I think is really powerful. So, even going back to biblical times, if you believe that, in the scriptures, it said that Moses said to God, "What is your name?" And God said, "I am that I am." Right? So the idea is that we all are whoever we say we are. If you sit there and say, "I am sick," then you'll be sick. I
Mhm.
am, I am poor, I don't have enough money. Well, exactly to your point, that prayer is then reflecting back exactly that suffering mentality. So again, I have another funny story. The other day, my son, he's never run a race in his life. Like, he's 10 and he's never gone for a jog or anything like that. And he comes home and he tells us that he made the running team, and I'm like, oh my god, like, that's pretty amazing. And they're going and they're competing against all these other schools and stuff. And I'm like, oh geez, imagine if you actually went for a run, let alone just being able to get in like that. So anyway, I'm teaching him about the idea of mental rehearsal and going back to manifestation. Picture yourself running the race before you do it, and bring up the emotion and energy that you'd feel whilst you were running the race. It's something that athletes and musicians do a lot when they're training. So basically, he got that all nailed. And then we're walking to the bus stop, and I said to him, now, when you think about it from the fact you've already won. So when he is going to do this big race, I said, it's not, just say in your prayers, not like, please allow me to win this white race. Say, thank you for having allowed me to have won the race. Thank you for allowing me to have run so beautifully, and, having a great time and all that. But changing the statement to like it's already happened in the most positive way. And then he was getting on the bus, and I'm like, good luck. Not that you'll need it because you've already won.
That's
And
beautiful.
he was laughing. But it is that whole idea of like, I always say in my prayers, thank you for allowing my manifestations to come to me with ease. Because
Mhm.
whatever we want to create in our life, we want it to come to us with such ease. And then always saying it from the position like it's already happened, because the whole idea with manifestation is that you have to feel the gratitude for it already being there rather than it not being there. And it's that, like, I want to get well, that's the future. So if you're saying, I want to get well, it's like you never quite get there. Thank you
Mhm.
for giving me a healthy body. Thank you for giving me a healthy mind. Whatever you want to create, like, you already have it. So that should always be the prayer.
Mhm. And it shifts you out of a victim
Yes.
mentality and that victim energy, which is not good. So it goes even back to the beginning of the conversation, which is when you believe everything is happening for you and not to you, you automatically gain um I don't want to say control, because like that obviously doesn't exist, and I think we all know that deep down, but it gives you a lot more power, and it's like you're in charge of your health to some
Yes.
extent, or to a lot of extent. And the heart connection and feeling gratitude, I mean, that's all of Joe Dispenza's work, right? Is when it comes to healing yourself from serious disease, like serious cancer, serious incurable ailments, is feeling that gratitude. And it's happened countless times at his workshop. So it's not like a one off, and like this is not actually, there's like no science behind it. Like he has case studies, which is incredible.
Absolutely. And I think as well, you know, when you're talking about health and becoming well, it's all about the way that, I've heard him talk many a time. And he tells people that they have to get into that body of that person that is well. Like, the
Mhm.
old body is not there anymore. The old mind is not there anymore. You need to envisage yourself as that new person. And you just, I mean, I've seen it in front of my eyes. It's unbelievable the shifts that people have. But even if you don't have a serious disease, you can do that for everything. Like we're talking about manifestation. If you're in a job or a relationship that you don't like, you use those techniques to change you to be able to be that new person that you want to be. I mean, going back to the story that I told you, my old self, and I'm sure you probably have the same story. I feel like we're all here on the same path. My old self died a decade ago when I decided I didn't want to be that person that was suffering so much anymore and was in that job that they didn't like and had 100 million negative thoughts going around in their mind. That person, that Sara, died. And then I was reborn again in the same life. And to me, that's just been the biggest change. But I couldn't have gotten there had I not envisaged myself to be a different person. Like, yes, I'm still me. I still got, the same bits personality to the same extent, but the way that I perceive life and the way that I think and the way that I treat people is so different to the way I did before. And I think some people, they just get so used to being in that suffering mindset, and even though they say they don't want to be in it, they don't do anything to change it. And you can't be the same person in a new life. You actually have to change your personality to change your reality. So, yeah, I just think you have to do the work. I'm
Mhm.
sure you've done it. I definitely did it. And I still have to do it every day. Like,
Mhm.
I catch myself at moments like yesterday, I got really annoyed at my daughter for something. We were running late and we were stressed out, and I had to take her to an appointment, and she wanted me to do X, Y, and Z with her, and I just didn't have time, so I had to take her somewhere. And she got annoyed with me, and this is like real first world problems. But the idea is, I realized for the moment I went unconscious and I got really angry with her, and I don't often do that. But if I was not conscious of everything that I did, I wouldn't even realize that that was a bad thing. So I think, the first part to being that new self is being conscious of everything that you do, your words, your actions, your thoughts, and that's the first step to change.
Mhm. And then, having grace for those moments too, right?
Mm,
Because you are human and we are gonna have flaws, and no matter how much work and personal development you do, I mean, even look at Ram Dass at the end, right? He would
mm,
share stories about getting angry because his microphone didn't show up, and then he's like, everything is God can show up in all sorts of ways, and right now God is showing up as this damn microphone, right? And these are tests for you to grow and expand and just to, develop further, but it's not to, like, beat yourself up because you lost
mm.
your temper. It's just to accept and love all of it in its wholeness. And, I mean,
Beautiful.
looking back at all of the work that I've done, I mean, I've been doing this since my 20s, and I'm utterly embarrassed of the person before, and I think that's such a great thing because it shows how far I've come myself, and I'm sure and I hope that in 10 years I can do the same thing where it's just like you have such a shift. But you mentioned the old Sara dying, and I feel like that's such an important part I want to highlight is
Mm,
we often identify with whether it's being sick or healing, right? Not I'm not healing, I'm healed, I'm whole. Like that's what healed means is you're whole, you are whole. Unless you're dead, you're whole, so you are healed. We have these things that my teacher calls nofs, which are like these false identities that we kind of like put onto ourselves. It's not like your true essence or your true soul. So a lot of moms will do it like I'm a mom. Well, that's a function and that's a role that's not
mm.
who your soul is at its essence. So when it comes to like killing the old version of yourself to grow and better yourself and constantly be up leveling, how do you shed those false identities in order to step into the new version of yourself?
Well, that's a really good question. And I think, for me, what I did is, as I kind of mentioned, I went very heavy into the personal development work, but I was doing none of it before. So going
Mhm.
heavy is like reading a book, which I didn't have time to really do before. All the sorts of books I would read would not be the books that I read now. It's funny, someone asked me the other day, like, "Can I see the books that you read?" And I look, because similar to you, I listen to a lot of them, being a podcast producer and host. and they're all personal development books. I'm like, I have just no interest in reading something that isn't like that, because that is what I love. Like, and I couldn't feel more love for that kind of work than I do. So anyway, the first thing I did was go into that. I studied meditation. So I do heaps of different meditations. And that, to me, that has been such a key thing in changing my life. And I know everyone talks about meditation, and people who are listening who might think, oh, I don't have time to meditate, or, I used to think that too. That really was one of the key things that changed my life. And when I started, I was terrible at it. And I thought, this is not for me. Maybe I'm just one of those people that can't meditate. Well, that's not true for anyone, because I believe every single person can meditate. But like anything, you have to give it time. And I think sometimes we're so quick to judge, to say like, we can't do that, or we're not good at that, or we have the monkey mind. But you just need to find a meditation that works for you, because I think the ones I initially were doing were like body scan meditations, and I was like, this is so boring, and I didn't like it at all. But then when I found meditations that suited me, I loved them. And I started learning about manifestation many, many years ago. And the concept I spoke about before, which was the visualization technique, that I love doing that. And I really got into that. And that helped me, like the idea that we can create our future reality. I had never heard that before. And so when I learned about that, I was like, wow, this is so fun. So, you're making personal development work fun. Like, if you know that you can wake up every morning and create your new future, or your life, or your dreams, then of course you're going to get up early before your kids wake up or whatever, to sit in meditation for, even if it's 15 minutes, half an hour, whatever you want to do, to be able to visualize and raise your energy to be able to create the life and dreams that you want. Who wouldn't do that? So
Mm-hmm.
I began really enjoying everything I was doing to do with personal development work. And the more that I got into it, the more I realized, the old Sara, who may have not watched what she was saying. And, I was always a good person, of course. I knew right from wrong, and I never wanted to ever hurt anyone or anything like that. But I wasn't conscious of the words I was saying. I wasn't conscious of what I was thinking. I was overthinking so much. I would get into these ruts of really, thinking about something that hadn't even happened and ruminating over it. Say it was like an email from my boss, and I'd put a negative tone on it. And then I'd be ruminating over this email, and like driving to work already angry, playing out a scenario in my head that had never occurred. So then I'm getting into the office upset with my boss when he didn't do anything, and then I'm creating that negative reality through negative manifestation, which is possible as well. So when I learned all these techniques, then I shed the skin of that old Sara, who, you nicely mentioned before. The soul is always the same. That doesn't change. The essence of who I am is exactly the same. But the best part of me, my higher self, got to come out and be front and center. And having that, and knowing that I was then moving through life, thinking about what I was doing before I did it, thinking about what I was saying, and doing everything with kind of grace and ease, and being led with a service mindset, allowed this kind of new identity, I suppose, to appear. And it has changed my life radically in the most beautiful way possible. And I'm so grateful every day for that. I mean, what a blessing it is to, people ask me about my job, and I'm like, honestly, if I did not get paid for what I do, I'd probably still do it, because it is so fun. Like, I used to go to work years ago hating life. And now I go to work every day getting to talk to the most amazing people in the world, getting to do a lot of writing, speaking to audiences. I mean, like, anyone can do this, though. I'm no different to anyone else. Like, I would never have envisaged this for myself 10 years ago, but then I created it. So everyone else has the ability to create it too. And it doesn't matter what background you've come from, what hardships you've had in your life. And obviously everyone's path's different. They might not want this path for themselves, but you are able to create your dreams if you follow these techniques.
Mm-hmm. And what a beautiful gift for your family as well, because you've done all of that work that you can show up as the best mother possible. And then that creates generational change. And that's like stopping intergenerational trauma being passed on, and like bad habits and bad ways of thinking that maybe like we had instilled within us, or like I should say me. I feel like, so I had my first boy at 30, which I guess like some people is like a little bit late, or I think it's pretty average now, but it's later
Yeah.
than traditionally speaking. And there's this movement going on that's like trying to get women to have kids younger again, like back like in their early 20s. Like they're just saying, you're going to miss your window, and you're still very fertile at 30. Like you're still very fertile, just you are. It doesn't start to take a dip until later. But if I had had a kid in my 20s, it would have been the worst thing for them and for me. I was just not ready. I was not the best version of myself. And it's still trying to understand who I am and being able to answer that with just the Ram Dass I am. Like that is, you're like, I am not Candice. I am not a mom. I'm not a wife. Like those are, again, functions and roles and beautiful parts of my life. But when it comes down to soul and essence, it's like, how do you get to I am? And then how do you teach your kids like I am? Like you have the divine in you. You are born with like this beautiful, pure love and light and kindness and joy and utterly perfect. And not to instill, I guess, like old programs or old ways of parenting that end up leaving people feel like I am not enough, or looking for external validation, or constantly trying to stuff down emotions and authenticity because they want to be loved, and like teaching them that love is only conditional as long as you're quiet and on your iPad and not making a mess in the house. So I would have been a very different person before. So I think it's beautiful that you're doing the work and sharing that, because it has like this massive ripple effect, and absolutely know that it does.
Absolutely. And I think, that's such a good point. Like, I think my mum, and back in that day, was very different, had me when she was like 23 or something. And I mean, that's amazing now because I get to have a mother who is younger. And so, like parents that aren't very old. um, so that's, been such a pro. But I mean, 23 is so young. And when people get upset with their parents, and I always try to tell them, try to tell people who come to me saying, my parents did this and now I'm like this. We can't put the blame on our parents. I mean, most parents were only doing the best that they could. And the
Mhm.
same with us. Like, when I parented, when I had my kids, I also was a similar age to you. I was just doing the best that I could at that time too. So I think back to your point a while ago, like we have to be easy on ourselves and not get so upset with what we may have done in the past, because it was it is what it is, and then we move on and hopefully we learn. And if we don't learn, we'll be reflected those lessons again and again and again till we do
Mhm.
learn.
So when it comes to connecting your mind and your heart, and I feel like a lot of people might have blockages, or we create like this dense armor around ourselves. Do you have a protocol for getting into that gratitude space or connecting to your heart space and allowing that flow?
Yes, so every morning, and I did it this morning, I go into meditation, and the first thing I do is get into my heart. And you know what? Some days it takes a lot longer. Sometimes I can sit in meditation for 2 hours, and I just sit in there until I've tamed my body, like it's that whole idea that you're riding a horse, and that horse is going to do whatever it wants to do, but are you going to sit there and tame it till it then is going in the direction that you want it to go to? And someone said to me on the podcast the other day, it's such a beautiful kind of a beautiful saying, but they're like, they sit in meditation with their wounds until the blood dries clear, runs clear. And I thought, God, that's such a beautiful way of saying it. And so, yeah, I sit in meditation, and if anything needs to come up, I allow it to come up. And I don't judge it, and I let it wash past. And sometimes there'll be tears that come with it, and it's unexpected. It will be, I'll think I'm fine, and I'll go into meditation and I'll get into that heart center, and then something will come up for me. But then I make sure that I center my heart and my mind together, and then I create this beautiful imagery of what I want to create in my life. And I'll do it every morning, centering my heart to love and then centering my brain in the same way. And when they meet, that's when I'm able to then create in my life. So that's how I start every morning, by, yes, getting into my heart center, but centering my heart and then centering my mind once I've centered my heart.
And I think that's such an important step because when it comes to like I wanted to ask with the road to greatness and if you were to create a roadmap, what would your step one look like for somebody?
I think the first one that I briefly spoke about before was conscious awareness. I think that
Mhm.
is because if you're not conscious of what you're doing, you cannot change it. So if you're not conscious of gossiping or saying negative words to people, not being kind, then you can't change it. So the first thing is being conscious of your words and then think about what you're thinking about. So when you realize that you're thinking about things that are not positive or not productive for your day, then change that. You know, we can all, I learned this technique ages ago and it's been really effective for me, that when I have a negative thought, and if it's a ruminating type of thought, so you understand what it is, you've sat in it, it's not like you're pushing it away, but it keeps coming up and it keeps coming up, then think in your mind about something that you love. It could be a child, it could be a dog, it could be a job, like literally, it could be your coffee in the morning, whatever brings you joy. Already know what you're going to think about. And soon as that negative thought comes in, move to the positive. And you could be doing this 60 to 70 times a day, but then the brain starts to rewire itself to stop going to the negative and start going to the positive. So that has been unbelievably effective in my life. And being conscious of your actions. So, like, what are you doing day to day? And are they serving other people? Like, if you don't like your job, then try and find a new one, but be conscious of the things you say, the things you do, and the things that you think. I think that is definitely the first tick on the roadmap to greatness.
It's so amazing that you said that because my what I wrote down was auditing your thoughts and awareness around negative self-talk and pattern interruption. So we are just aligned in that
Wow.
entirely. Yeah, that's amazing. I've been trying to practice with upward spiraling. So if I notice something that's negative, that's recurring, that's very familiar, is being able to interrupt it and then focus on something that's great about whatever that situation is and try to flip it to create a new neurowiring and like
Yes.
neuro pathway. And it's so powerful. And then you also become so aware of how easy it is to just see the negative or see the
Mm.
flaw or and how often you do it and you're like whoa, I have the ability to change this, and if I see everything with like such doom and gloom or negativity, then obviously that's going to scale out. So I have the power to flip that, and then it's kind of just like a constant practice, and how little can you dwindle that down to?
Absolutely. And perception is everything. You can have that. I'm sure most people have heard of the idea that, you have two sisters growing up in the same family. They can be twins, but the way that they perceive life is completely different, or situations. So, how are we perceiving everything? Are we perceiving it through a negative lens, or are we perceiving it through a positive lens? And, one of another great technique is how do I know this for sure? Byron Katie talks a lot about this, but it's in a lot of different work. What I'm so worried about, do I know for sure that it's true? I will promise you 98% of the time, you have no idea if it's true. Do you know if that girl is talking about me? Well, I don't really know. I might think she is, but do you know for sure? No. Okay, I'm thinking that that guy thinks that I'm a loser. Well, you're thinking that, but do you know that he thinks you're a loser? No. It's like we make up these stories in our head. My boss, I feel like my boss doesn't think that I'm as good as my colleague. Again, we do not know this for sure. And once we start reality testing our thoughts, we realize half of them are not true. They're just made up. And
Mhm.
you know what's really interesting as well? I heard this stat the other day. When we're ruminating over the past, majority of time, I think it's something like 70% of the time, whatever we're ruminating about, it's like it didn't even happen in the way that we perceived it. So
Mhm.
our memory of the past is not that exact memory. it's like we've just added some stuff to it, and we're telling a story, and all that negativity is not even true. So you really have to be so conscious of the way that you perceive situations, because we always have the ability to choose the way that we perceive them. And if we do, why wouldn't you put that positive lens on it?
Exactly, and then imagine how hard and difficult that you make your life and that identity and something and someone has wronged you if it didn't actually happen. I saw the same stat. I think I saw 50%, but who knows, right? It
Yeah,
could be 50 or 75%, but that's either way alarming number and it's like a coin toss. So even just knowing fundamentally that it could be objectively different from how you're recalling it, then why not choose to reframe it because you don't know either way.
absolutely. Absolutely.
So, self love is a topic I wanted to get into because that's a lot of work that I've been doing lately. And I think when we go on social media, that's a bubble bath and a candle and like a Thai massage. And that's what we call self love. And we think that that's us loving ourselves. And while those things are pleasant and lovely and also necessary, I think that is the most superficial way to look at what self love
Yeah.
is. I would love your definition of self love and what does that feel like for you?
I mean, for me, self-love is loving me and the essence of who I am. To me, that's self-love. Like we spoke about before, when you become unconscious and you lose your temper or you do things that are not right, having still that compassion for yourself, that you know that you're a good person and that things like that do happen. And for me, the times where, well, the work that I've done to try and really get into self-love and to really sit with myself goes again back to meditation. Like, I'll sit in meditation for hours and really just get into that heart center to find that space where I'm connecting with a divine presence, and I can feel that, and I believe that to be true. And that connection allows me to then really get into the essence of who I am. And then in my eyes open life, I just have this really centered way about me where, I know that I'm enough. And I know that by doing this work, by doing the meditation, by being conscious of my thoughts, by leading with a service mindset, allows me to feel good about who I am. And to me, that's self love. Yeah, it's
Hmm.
great to look after yourself and, yes, have a bath and have a massage and do all those things and carve out time for yourself in some way or another. Because I think, for a lot of working parents or people that are looking after kids or whatever, life is busy, and being able to take time for yourself is important. But I think getting to the essence of our true self and working on all of our wounds and working through all the muck to get to the beautiful essence of who we are, that is true self-love. And
Hmm.
yeah, that, I mean, to me, what more could we want in life than to really be the best version of ourselves possible? And then it kind of winds back to our conversation at the start. Then you're the best person that you can be to everyone that you come into contact with. And I truly believe that's true self-love.
I think you worded that beautifully. I do, because I think when you come from a place of being full on the inside and having that love internally and not looking for others to fill up that cup, like that is true self love. I think a lot of times, if that is at a deficit, then we're in this needy place of we need our kids to validate us so that we feel like a good mom. We need our partner to validate us so that we feel worthy of love, or our relationships with our friends. And it's constantly external, or you need certain amount of likes on social media, which is my pitfall is comparison.
Mm,
Operating at a deficit or like at a lack when you have everything that you need internally. So to be able to get into that place and connect with your heart and like feel that love and joy internally separate from whatever else is going on, while not easy, I feel like that is necessary. And then again, that will just emanate like externally from you, and people pick that up, and then those relationships become lighter and more pure and more loving because you're operating from fullness.
absolutely. And I think you bring up comparison, which is, I mean, everyone has to deal with that. And, they're saying comparison is the thief of all joy. We all know it, but we still do it. And one thing that I really sat with for a while that has made me feel better about that is that we're all on our own journey. So, you comparing yourself to someone else, me comparing myself, like that person's journey that we may be comparing ourselves to is completely different to what
Mhm.
our journey is. And what they need to achieve in their journey might, we have no idea what their karma is, what they're going through, what's even happening behind closed doors. And as we know with social media, just because we perceive people, put out things and we're perceiving them in a certain way, I promise you, and as you would know, that's a lot of the time that's not what's happening in their house or what's happening in their life. There's a lot more to it. So I think we have to be so careful with that stuff, because it's happened to me before as well. You can be in a great mood and then something triggers you, and
Mhm.
then you go back into that feeling less than, not good enough then, but you have to concentrate on you. It's good to look around and see what others are doing for inspiration, but use it
Mhm.
only for inspiration, not for suffering.
So, how do you when you catch yourself doing that, what's a way to mitigate that for you?
Well, even for me, if I notice that something does trigger me, then I'll not look at it. So I know,
Mhm.
for example, and I've noticed people have done this with me. Like, I think, like, God, I can tell that I've probably triggered people in my own life, that they won't want to talk about certain things with me, my job or this or that, because it triggers them. And it doesn't mean that they don't love me, but maybe within their life they haven't achieved what they want to do. So, you can kind of feel it, and you have to accept that, and that's okay that they're like that. And as we said, like, it's happened to both of us. But if it is something that triggers me, then maybe it's like not following someone, or not, how you can kind of like change the settings so you don't see their stuff as much. Doing something like that can sometimes help in situations. And also, again, going back to that, knowing that their journey is different. So
Mhm.
whatever they're doing, then just feel joy and happiness for them, because when we're in that abundant mindset of feeling so happy for others who have achieved, which I do 99.9% of my time, I'm so happy when other people achieve good things, then you'll see that ricocheted back to you as well. So
Mhm.
really, knowing the fundamentals of that, and knowing how we're in that lack mentality, and when we become a little bit jealous or we're comparing, then that's going to come back to us, that the law of cause and effect. Understanding that notion then makes you kind of change the way that you're thinking and your actions.
I've heard something really similar. So if your response or your visceral feeling towards someone else's success is negative, then it's kind of saying, "Oh, that I don't want that." Versus
Yes.
if you're rooting for someone and you're like, "Oh, they do want that. That is a good thing. That is something that I should send their way." So it's almost like you're pushing it away further, the more jealousy and like comparing that you do, but it's still so tricky. Even to myself, so I turn all my likes off because I just don't think that's a healthy model, so I just tried to lead by example, and it's just like I turn the likes off, the views are still there because it's just that is not a setting that you can do, and then for me, it's also unfollowing. It's I think for some people, I can watch and be truly inspired by their work, and it doesn't matter if they have, like, 100x the whatever than me. I do for some reason, it doesn't trigger that comparison or that jealousy, and I can truly look at them as that is where I wanna be, like, they're a good roadmap for me, and then other people, I don't know what it is, but it's like I cannot get out of it right now, so I'm just have to unfollow until I can align and figure out what's going on within myself and, like, what wound is that touching that I'm getting such a response or I'm feeling such a lack or not good enough or whatever that might be.
And it's interesting because they are our biggest teachers. So it's
Mhm.
almost like you have to be grateful for that showing up, because it's showing unhealed, as you're saying, unhealed parts of yourself that still need to be worked on.
Mhm.
And we need to be compassionate about that as well. And I think
Mhm.
also, what another thing that I learned, which I think is very useful for people, like, we're living in an abundant society. So if we see, like, I'll use the example of you and I don't know, say that you had Joe Smith on your podcast. Doesn't mean Joe Smith is not going to come on my podcast because he came on your podcast.
Mhm.
If we're looking at it through the lens of lack, then we're not going to get Joe Smith on the podcast because the universe is abundant. So just because Candice has some stuff doesn't mean Sara can't get there too. So I think we have to really remember that we're not going into that kind of Darwinist mentality, like every man for themselves. It's not like that. Like we live in an abundant universe that will give to you what you reflect. So if you just keep that in mind the whole time, then you'll be okay. But if you get in that negative hole, be conscious about it, like what you and I have done in the past, and get yourself out of it. Because if you stay in it, you're just going to be reflected more of what you don't want. And I think that's really necessary for people to hear.
Right, and it's also so important to know what you don't want. So
Yeah.
those examples for you are also saying pay attention, don't do this, and like make different choices. And they also say if you feel like everyone has already done it all and that you can't start a podcast because it's oversaturated, go into the cereal aisle or go into the
Yes.
bread aisle, and there's an abundance of white bread and they're all labeled and packaged differently and everyone has a different favorite and they might buy a different one. Like there is just abundance and people like multiple options and choices, and don't let like a saturation, a quote saturation of any market deter you if that's where your heart wants you to go.
Yeah. And I think that's such beautiful advice. And really, I think it was J.K. Rowling who got rejected by so many publishers before her book was a success. And then it was like, the biggest book in the world or something like that. Just because one person says you can't do it doesn't mean that you can't do it. And granted, if you do try 10 times and you get nowhere fast, then maybe it is a sign. But if you feel that there's still something inside that says that you want to do this, then give it your all. Just don't take one person's advice and let that be gospel for you. Try and work out your own path and find the information that you need, because I think that's very important as well.
Do you have a way to discern when to pivot? Because I think with her, I want to say it was like 86 times that she got turned down before, or maybe it was even closer to 100 before someone
Wow.
accepted her book deal. And obviously, it made her a billionaire because it was just wildly successful. So imagine all of those people that said no. So that's a lot of times and a lot of feedback of people saying this is garbage. So how do you know that you're in alignment or you are doing the right thing versus I need to pivot, maybe this isn't my skill set, or maybe I'm off by just like a little bit, I'm missing the mark by a little bit?
That's such a good question. I actually had this the other day where I'm trying to do a few different things for the podcast. And a producer came up with this brilliant idea and we recorded some stuff. And she was like, "This is amazing." And I listened to it and I thought there's something not right here. Like something didn't sit comfortably with me, but I didn't quite know what it was. And then a few other people listened to it and they're like, "Yeah, that's really good." And I'm like, okay. Like people that I do trust are saying that this is good. And these are people in the business. They're not just like random friends. And then my audio producer, who, we were talking about our love for audio producers before we got on today, who is very experienced. I said, "Can you cut this up?" He did. And I said, "What do you think of it?" He goes, "Yeah, I think you can do better." And I'm like, I knew it. I agree with you. But it wasn't till he said that I knew there was something in my gut that didn't feel right about it. So kind of going on to what you're talking about, like in the opposite way, my heart told me there was something that still needed to be worked on with this concept. And a few people were saying to me that it was really good, but I knew in my heart of hearts that it wasn't quite there yet. And then someone said to me, my audio producer, "You can do more work on this. It's not there yet." But it was a good lesson for me to teach to go back to my gut feeling. And I think if you are like J.K. Rowling, I'm assuming, I don't know the ins and outs of her story, but she must have had a feeling that this was going to be a book that would work, because going to 78 or 100, however many people you said publishers, and having that many rejections, like you'd be like, oh god, like there is a people in professional places telling me this book isn't good. But she had a knowing. So I think it like goes back to that. I had a knowing that this concept was not quite right yet.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in our gut, in our intuition, we have this knowing, and I think we need to follow that. If you're putting out work, say it's for a book or a podcast or anything in your life that you want to achieve, and you kind of think like maybe it's not that good yet, or I know this is going to be good, but just not the right person has found it, then I would say follow that more than anyone else's guidance.
Beautiful advice. Before I let you go, do you want to share anything with the listeners as far as anything you're working on, or like a top book recommendation, a top audio recommendation, a top podcast recommendation of your own that they can dive into?
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm just trying to think back to the podcast episodes I've done that, I mean, I love all of them, obviously, but there always is amazing ones. I did one last year. It's actually been the most downloaded episode. It's so funny. I had Esther Perel on the podcast. She came to Australia last year, the end of last year. She came on the podcast. Her episode, she's wonderful. The episode was wonderful. And in that short period of time, having a podcast for 4.5 years, she has outspiked every other guest that I had on. And I only had her on not that long ago. So, because the downloads that you had from years ago, you would think that they kind of have the most. No, Esther has taken over, so by a mile as well. So her episode is beautiful. I mean, there's just so many good ones. Matthew McConaughey, Gabor Mate is fabulous. He's been on a couple of times. I mean, anyone just look at A Life of Greatness, listen to the episodes. I did one. I was thinking about it when you were talking about prayer. It was a few years ago, and you should try and get her on your podcast. Caroline Mace. She's a medical intuitive, and she talks all about, there was a book she wrote about prayer. It was one of my most favorite episodes. So if you just search A Life of Greatness and then Caroline Mace, which is MYSS, she's beautiful. I have a manifestation course that I sell on my website, and some meditations if you're interested in getting into meditation. But for anyone that's listening to this conversation and thinking like, where do I start? I want to change, but I don't know how. I think if you really go back to that whole idea of conscious awareness, reading some books, one of the first books that I read that I love, and it's such a short read, is Deepak Chopra. I think it's like this. Deepak Chopra, he wrote it apparently in an hour and a half when he was on the plane. I think it's like the 7 spiritual laws of success. I think it's the number 7. It is such an easy read. If you like listening, it takes an hour and a half. Such an easy listen. I'd go to that. That was very useful to me, and just really carve out time every day to do meditation, to do the things that you need to do to live the best life possible. So, yeah, thank you for having me on your podcast.
Of course, this was amazing, and I would love to have you on in the future because I have pages and pages of notes and topics to get into. But this was incredible. And then, where can everyone find you on socials?
So you can find me at Sara Grynberg on Instagram, Sara Grynberg on Facebook, and my website, saragrynberg.com, for the manifestation course, and A Life of Greatness if you want to listen to the podcast in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all of those great places that you can listen to podcasts.
And highly recommended. I will make sure I link all of that below for everyone in the show notes. And thank you so much again. I hope that you have a great, I think, morning over there, right?
Morning. Thank you
Yes.
so much for having me.
And that's it for this week's episode of Chatting with Candice. Before you go, make sure that you have hit the like and subscribe button, left that 5-star review, and last, if you enjoyed it or know someone else that might enjoy this episode as well, you can share it on your socials or just send it to them in a text. It's a great gift. And I'll see you next week. Bye, everybody.